Hey listeners, while we're getting ready for season 2 of the Pandemic Parenting Podcast, we wanted to share with you a special bonus episode. This conversation didn't make it into a previous episode, but we definitely felt like it was an important one to share. Lindsay and I will reflect on a challenge we both faced as mothers, and we know so many other parents face as well: postpartum depression and anxiety. Can you say, "This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski"?
Why do we have to?
Just try it.
Oh, I can't.
Deep breath. Okay.
This is Dr. Amanda Zelechoski. Lindsay Malloy. Ah!
No, wait, say Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
Dr. Lindsay Malloy.
No, come back.
This is Dr. Lindsay Malloy. Welcome to the Parenting Podcast.
One more time.
And then after that, can we have a candy?
No.
Please, Mommy.
Okay, ready?
Pandemic Parenting Podcast.
Excellent.
Welcome to the Pandemic Parenting Podcast. I'm Dr. Amanda Zelechoski.
And I'm Dr. Lindsay Malloy. We are two psychologists, scholars, and moms, and together we co-founded Pandemic Parenting.
We're here to share science-based research and help all who care for kids navigate this challenging time together. Please note that the information contained in this podcast and on the Pandemic Parenting website are intended for educational purposes only. Nothing discussed in this podcast or provided on the website are intended to be a substitute for professional psychological advice, diagnosis, or treatment. No doctor-patient relationship is formed between the hosts or guests of this podcast and listeners. If you need the qualified advice of a mental health or medical provider, we encourage you to seek one in your area. So we would be sort of remiss not to even touch on, such an important topic for both of us. I know we both feel really passionately about it, and so many parents struggle with postpartum mental health issues, whether it shows up for you as depression, anxiety. I can talk a little bit about how for me it showed up as rage. But mental health issues and symptoms and struggles following the birth of a child. So I wondered if you could talk a little bit about your journey with that.
Sure, absolutely. Yeah, and I agree. This is such an important topic. And I think, there's almost nothing that could be more isolating than, having a newborn baby and going through that postpartum time. But then now for a lot of people, you add a pandemic on top of that. And so you have people who are even more at risk, I think, for postpartum depression or anxiety. And for me, I had it with both of my kids, relatively mild with the first one, more severe with the second. And for me, it just showed up as just severe anxiety. And I couldn't sleep, which was very stressful, especially having a newborn and a toddler. I just could not sleep. My insomnia was out of control. I mean, my newborn was sleeping for 4 hours at a time, and I was sleeping like 40 minutes, if that, and just, laying awake, panicking. I can't even remember specific thoughts or concerns or worries. It was just like this racing feeling of anxiety. So I thought, okay, I've been through this once before. I got over it multiple ways, right? Therapy, medication. And I just thought, I can figure it out myself this time. I don't know why I would have thought that when I didn't do it the first time. And it was much worse the second time. So I let it go on for longer than it should have, even knowing all that I know and having all the experiences I had, which seems kind of ridiculous. But I did let it go on for longer than it should have before I sought out help that second time, because I thought I could somehow make it better on my own, and I couldn't. Yeah. So I eventually went back to the same things that had helped me before, and they made such a huge difference so quickly. So I was really lucky in that way.
I guess the first time when you did end up seeking help, how did you eventually get to that place of knowing, okay, this is some anxiety. This isn't just normal, new exhausted mom stuff. How did you get to that place of, I think I need help with this?
I think it went on longer than you would expect from the typical, quote unquote, baby blues. And so that I knew was a warning sign. And then for me, I spent so much time obsessing over whether it was significant enough to seek help that I just got to the point where it's like, okay, I think it is, just because that's all I'm thinking about is whether I should and whether it's significant or enough to do that or not. I was also really lucky to be surrounded by lots of clinical psychologists in my life that I was able to talk to about it, and, including people who really normalized that for me. And so, I was able to do that pretty early on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. For me, it was I did not want to get help for so long because this was not a me issue, right? So I said that this for me presented as more sort of anger and rage. And this for me was with my second child. And so one of the things I think is important to go back and just, say is that I am a clinical psychologist. I work with a lot of people with these issues. So because of that, I knew, well, I would be able to outsmart the system, right? If this ever came to pass for me. And so I had, a really pointed conversation with my husband before our first child was born to say, I'm not going to recognize these things in myself. And so if they show up, this is what it may look like, but it can look really different. I'm going to need you to help me identify if I am experiencing any of these things. And I'm going to try to talk you out of it. And I will find ways to convince you that that is not what is going on and that you don't know what you're talking about and that I am the professional. And so, back off, and you need to just ignore that and move forward anyway. Right. So it was like, I even had the foresight to know, I'm going to need help if this comes to pass, and I'm going to try to talk you out of the fact that I'm going to need help. Right. And so it didn't end up being as much of an issue with our first child, but when our second child was born, we were in the midst of so much transition. We had just moved to a new city. We were both in relatively new jobs. We didn't have much of a village yet because of so much transition. And so he had just started a new job that meant a lot of travel right when our second child was born. And so for me, what I now understand was a lot of postpartum issues. It was just anger directed, of course, at him, at the world, at, so it didn't look like the traditional depression, right? I wasn't staying in bed. I was angry. You're traveling, you're gone. I don't have support here. And so that was a pretty big recipe for disaster, right? Wait a minute, I told you to identify when these things are an issue. Now you're trying to do that. And of course, it's all directed at you to begin with. And now you're going to try to tell me that these are mental health issues? Are you kidding? So for us, the way we actually ended up getting help was through marriage counseling, right? Because we were arguing so much. And it was through that, because this was not a me issue. I am not struggling with postpartum issues. I am mad because you are being a terrible partner, which wasn't true. It was just the way I projected all of it. And so it was just really interesting to me as I reflect back that I think for a lot of people, postpartum issues can show up in lots of different ways. And I struggled to identify what I was experiencing as probably postpartum anxiety or depression that manifested as anger. And it wasn't identified until we were in, marriage therapy. And it was like, oh, maybe this is some of that stuff going on that I was worried about.
It's a remarkable level of self-awareness, though, that you were able to say in advance, this is what might happen. This is what I might say. And this is how I might try to get out of it.
Well, I am the most stubborn individual you'll probably ever meet. So yes.
That's amazing. For me, I knew that some of the things that I was experiencing or some of the thoughts that I was having, I knew that they were not rational. I knew that they weren't logical. I knew, and it kind of scares me thinking back to that. I knew that on a rational level, but I still couldn't stop myself from thinking them, from obsessing over them and that's something a lot of people don't really get to, is that kind of obsessive compulsive type tendencies can also develop and be sort of part of the postpartum process. And so I don't think I really fit that necessarily, but there were some, things that was all kind of part of the anxiety. So it's just strange to think about now, but it wasn't that long ago.
No. And in some ways, I think it's interesting that you had that self-awareness to know these aren't rational thoughts, which I think in some ways maybe opened the door for you to get help faster than I did, because to me, these were completely rational. No, you are doing these things. That is the reason for my frustration, or this situation has happened at my job, and that is why I'm angry. I could rationalize all of it, which made it I don't need help with this. If everybody else would just stop doing stupid, annoying things, then it would be fine. And so I'm not saying one's better or worse, but it's just, I think these are important things for us to bring to light around why or why not people might seek help, or what holds them back, or this ability to just acknowledge oh, wow, maybe this is an issue going on.
Yeah. I think back to how lucky I thought about this a lot, actually, how lucky I was that I didn't have any family members or a partner or friends who were telling me that I shouldn't get help, or that this wasn't what I was really experiencing, or that, tried to make me feel bad about it, or, created stigma around, seeking mental health resources or medication or anything. I'm so lucky, because even without those things, it was really, really hard to do it.
Absolutely. Right.
It was really hard. And I look at people who like are being told by others, or like culturally, it's not acceptable for them to seek help, or what have you. It's just really hard to think about how hard it must be for them to take that step.
Yeah. And why people don't, right? Think about how much unsolicited advice you get when you're a new parent anyway. And so then if you add in some of these, like you said, really stigma laden things like mental health issues, and people have lots of opinions, right? Like I think about, medication, and how a lot of people make assumptions about, oh, well, if you take that medication, that's going to hurt the baby, or what, man, talk about the layers of sort of guilt. Like, so then you're stuck between, if I get help for myself, am I a bad parent? If I don't, am I a bad parent? Just all these added layers to the swirl of emotions and exhaustion and change that comes with having a new child.
Yeah, which is sort of like, I remember someone saying to me, this is kind of, the postpartum period is honestly like a recipe for depression and anxiety in many ways. Like you're usually a lot more isolated, you're getting no sleep or very broken sleep. Like we know that that's very much linked with mental health. You've got this incredible responsibility on your hands. You might not be eating very well. And plus all the hormonal and, all of those changes, which cannot be underestimated. It's just, in many ways, it's just a recipe for that. And so it's just important, I think, to be talking about it. I put my whole experience out there on Facebook, and I know people have criticized me for that. People family, friends, whatever. Some people don't understand why you would talk about something that's so private publicly. But I've had people private message me and say, like, not tons of people, but even one or two is enough for me to realize I did the right thing. It's just saying, that encouraged me to get help, or to seek resources myself, because I thought, okay, if you can do this, and if you're doing this, then I can do this. And it's like, okay, well, that was worth putting it out there then. And I also don't think there's any shame there with that. But in many ways, I'm lucky to be in a position where I can put it out there and know that it's not going to affect my, career or things like that.
Yeah. And I think that was why we wanted to, have this conversation, and because we think it's so important to try to reduce the stigma where this isn't something you caused, you didn't do anything wrong to be one of the many who struggle with these issues. And, just to sort of normalize, like, here we are, two psychologists, like, this is our world. We know this stuff, and there was nothing we did or didn't do to make it show up for us or not, it was just there, and we struggled to acknowledge it, identify it, finally go get help. This is why we need to keep having these conversations, because you're right. If one person listening to this can hear some of themselves in any number of the ways we've talked about it showing up, then, I hope that makes a difference.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Pandemic Parenting Podcast. Make sure to hit follow or subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whichever platform you're listening on to be notified of future episodes. We'd also love to connect with you on social media. Look for our blue and yellow logo when you search Pandemic Parenting on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, or YouTube, and you'll find us. Or follow the links in the show notes.
Let us know what you think of this episode by leaving a review on Apple Podcasts. Your 5-star review helps us move up the charts to reach even more parents and caregivers. If you have a specific question or topic you'd like us to address in a future episode, let us know. You can email info@pandemic-parent.org and mention podcast in the subject line.
And this podcast isn't all we do, by the way. Pandemic Parenting is a 501c3 nonprofit providing free science-based resources for parents and all who care for children while navigating the COVID-19 pandemic. To learn more about our organization and access our extensive extensive library of webinars, videos, blogs, and more, visit www.pandemic-parent.org.
Lastly, this show wouldn't be possible without supporters like you. Lindsay and I donate our time to this podcast, but we do have an incredible team working behind the scenes to make this all happen. If you'd like to support the show beyond leaving your 5-star review, visit www.pandemic-parent.org/support and donate today.
Thanks for listening. Hope you can join us next time.